All right, welcome back to Sunrise Daily, but there are some updates concerning the protest for aviation workers in Lagos, the ATSAN members. So they are protesting, and we understand that they occupy the gates of the airport since 2 a.m. At the moment, the commandant has called them to a meeting. Our aviation correspondent updates us with that, this particular information. So remember, we did bring you this story when we started as early, just before 7 a.m., that the workers for Courtney say they are protesting the sacking of about 37 of their workers. They say certain processes, they were not just happy with it, but we also did bring you the response of Courtney, who did say that they followed the processes that were stipulated and that they had been in negotiation, and that they are equally surprised to see the workers protest. And this, by Courtney says, is tantamount to disrupting and violating other people's rights. And as a result of this protest, Ibom Air has issued a statement saying the activities have been impacted by this strike. So who knows what else. So we're hoping to see if we could get some response from several other authorities there. For instance, the Ministry of Aviation, the NCAA, the civil authorities. They all need to just wade in on this one. We're also hoping that the meeting that the protesters have been called into, their leaders reckon by the commandant there, would yield some results, because already the 7 a.m. flights have already been affected by this. So we need to manage the situation and see how much more improvements or at least some sort of solution that can be addressed or reached with those meetings.
Oh, we'll wait to see what the engagement will be like, and what eventually they yield. It's unclear what time this particular protest video was shot. This is an amateur video sent in by those who were at the scene of the protest. We certainly will keep you updated as to what precisely is happening in the aviation sector as we get it, especially with regards to Courtney and the MM2 situation, a very busy airport, one of the key airports out of Lagos, and we know that has already affected a number of plans, as you highlighted, Chamberlain. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see, just how the airlines are able to adjust, and even Courtney itself, how it's able to resume operations as the engagement also keep on going.
Absolutely. So we'll get you more information on that matter as we get them. Ayo, back to you.
Well, thank you, Chamberlain. Well, it's one of the issues that will most certainly determine who becomes president or who becomes governor in any of the states in the country in the months ahead. But let's continue our conversation that we started earlier with Dr. Monday Michaels Oshibagu, who is CEO, Bill's Box, and former spokesman of the Nigeria Association of Small and Medium Enterprises. Thanks for joining us this morning.
Thank you, Ayo.
The elections are not far away, and everyone is already saying what they can do or what they cannot do and all. Earlier in our conversation, we heard the Director General of the Nigeria Employers Consultative Association, NECA, saying OPS members pay something in the region of 50+ taxes to get their businesses running across the various tiers of government, federal, state, and local, and all of that. So one is wondering, in your opinion, how these conversations will flow into engagement of those vying for office.
Well, he's accurate with what he said about the multiple taxations and levies that we encounter as businesses in Nigeria. But the fact is, who is going to walk the talk? That's our concern. For the first time, all political candidates tend to agree that the economy is a fundamental problem. How to fix it? We've been looking at the offers being made by some candidates, but we are more concerned in seeing something that will become more in practice than just the paperwork. We have very novel paperwork that have been on the shelf for years. Issues that concern the organized private sector stem from implementation and the sincerity of that implementation. We've had some form of implementations in the past that come in parts. And when they do, you know, they are truncated by one political activity or the lack of will by the system, you know, to see it to the end. We've had that experience in power reforms. We've had that experience in energy reforms in terms of oil and gas reforms. So the issue is, who is going to walk the talk?
When you say walk the talk, exactly what are you talking about?
You know, you must have the will and competence to have people in place to carry out that process. It may be a very difficult task. 2023 is going to be a very challenging one. And the fact that we are going to be challenged by some natural factors emerging from the flood. We're also going to look at how the market has responded to our forex operations. You're going to look at also what we have on the ground in terms of power capacity. So whoever is going to take that task has a lot of work to do.
Let's be clear, Dr. Shibogo. So you're saying that the year ahead is a lot more than just the elections.
Yes, it's a lot more.
But the elections is going to determine how we tackle the issues.
Definitely.
What are these issues? How significant are they in the scheme of things?
Okay, you know, we've been dealing with insecurity from the aspect of terrorism and banditry issues, kidnapping. Yeah. This time around, we'll be dealing with food security. And I do not know the capacity of our grains reserve right now. I do not have an accurate record of what we will have as backup. So the system may be inclined to do some form of importation, whether we like it or not, to actually bridge the gap by the impact of the flooding. And this has already affected livestock. The International Agency for Agricultural Development has already indicated that a lot of projects that they have in place in Nigeria have been impacted by this flood. You are quite aware that people have been displaced. Returning to their homes will take about 6 to 8 months of rehabilitation. That experience we had in 2012. This time around is a lot more because it happened at a period where a lot of people were producing. So those who are particularly in grains business, in fibers and tubers have been impacted. These are main staple foods for Nigerians. You are quite aware now that the costs for consumables have gone up in the past days. And it's going to continue like this. So whoever is coming in will have to create a balance between the capacity to import to support and also the capacity to also impute funds and as well as resources to that market to sustain it. That aside, you're looking at our power sector challenges. You're going to also look at our energy sector challenges. Now, I'm sure a lot of people underestimated how long the Ukrainian-Russian conflict would last. Russia right now is actually threatening food supplies around the world because of its response to the attack on Crimea. And so they may actually generate some form of food scarcity in terms of grains. And the world knows quite well that Ukraine is a reliable source for grains. So that's another challenge. So we're looking at some factors we can't control and the factors that we can control. But the issue is who is willing to take that work, to take very difficult decisions, because you can't be upping up taxes for where there's no income.
Well, some of them have said that they look forward to increasing the tax base, not just from the people that are within the tax net now, but expanding it across board. But you've been spokesman for NASME. A sizable number of people who feel that members of the informal sector, so to speak, we need to find a way to bring them into the tax net themselves, perhaps because they're not there. Is that something that you think is significant, or you think it's just a hoax?
It's not. It's important that you bring people into the tax net. That has always been our prayer, expand it. But you can only do that with people who earn income. You don't tax people who don't earn. There has been a reduction in the number.
Sorry, that's not to say that small and medium enterprises don't earn tax.
They do
revenue.
They do. But you see, Some years back, we had 44 million, about 44 million within the formal sector by the MBS report. It's declined now to about 39 million. What does that tell you? Some guys are out of business. And we don't know how many will be out of business by next year. And that's going to be a major challenge for whoever is coming in.
And what factors are responsible for this?
Well, there are several factors.
There are those who will
most
also...
small businesses die within the first 5 years.
There are those who also, you say that all the time, but there are those who will also say, perhaps it's because many people who get into businesses in the first place don't know enough about business to run business. So they just run business more for sustenance than for sustainability.
Well, you know, there are different entrances to the market. That's what I would say. You have too many gates to the market. Some persons are there to become entrepreneurs from the ideas that they've generated over the years. Some are there just simply because they need to survive. Some people also need it as a side business just in case what they do not survive. So there are different factors to why many people go into the market. But the most important thing is the sustainability of that market. Is it sustainable? There are a lot of people who come in and make the market quite sustainable. Our concerns should be on having a sustainable market that will give sustainable income. And if you have that, then you can expand your tax basket.
Well, I mean, you've said, asked this question repeatedly, who will build a cart? But let's see if our next guest has some answers for you. Dr. Muda Yusuf is Chief Executive Officer of Center for Promotion of Private Enterprise. He is a former DG of Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry, LCCI. He joins us virtually. Thanks for joining us this morning, Doc. So you've been speaking a lot about some of the things, decisions, policies that government at the federal level is putting out now. But then there are promises that are being made by incumbents, those who are aspiring to take over from the administration currently at the center. What for you, I mean, you probably have listened to Dr. Ashibogu as well a little. What for you are the challenges up against the next person who will take the seat as president of Nigeria?
Yeah, thank you very much. First, we need to get a very good understanding, of how these political parties or candidates will address the key issues. Because whoever is going to tackle a problem must demonstrate proper understanding of the problems. So far, I'm not seeing much of that. Most of the pronouncements are very general in nature, which anybody can make. Most of the pronouncements are not very rich in content. Most of them are also not deep enough, to convince anyone that yes, these, players have a very clear understanding of what the problems are. Many of them, they just talk about the problem the way any layman will talk about the problem. And you know what it is when you go to political rallies, it's even worse. Because that's just like a carnival, you just dance, talk, people dance around and say some few things, and they disperse. So that deep understanding, I think, the candidate needs to come across better. So having said that, there are quite a number of areas which I think the incoming actors will have to deal with, and they should have clarity on how to deal with them. The first is the fiscal challenge. That's the challenging of funding the country itself. I mean, you only need to look at the current budget. I mean, it tells the whole story of how bad the financial situation is with government. We are talking about a deficit of over 10 trillion. We are talking about a debt service of over 6 trillion. We are talking about a deficit, a subsidy budget of almost another 6 trillion. And in all of this, we are talking of a revenue of just about 9.4 or 9.7 trillion. And of course, you can't get all the revenue. So you have to discount that revenue maybe by 30%. So at the end of the day, you are confronted with a budget that, if by the time you service debt, you have nothing left. So how exactly are they going to fix this challenge? So the fiscal challenge of ensuring fiscal sustainability, fiscal consolidation, is something that we need to have very clear ideas about, because quite a number of them are making promises here and there. We will do this, we will do that. Nobody is telling us exactly how they will fund it.
Perhaps to quickly, Dr. Yusuf, just 1 second. On this fiscal, challenge that you're talking about, there have been a lot of talk around fiscal discipline itself, blocking loopholes and being more spendthrift and all of that. How do you see that playing out? Do you see any government having what it takes to plug whatever the loopholes may be within record time in order to address some of the issues you're raising?
Well, some of these things are easier said than done. And the challenge of the fiscal environment is even beyond, plugging of leakages. I imagine that there has to be some fundamental changes in the structure of governance, for instance. I imagine that there has to be some fundamental changes in some of the, the legislations, the investment environment, to increase the quantum of investment. I imagine that there has to be some fundamental reforms around some critical sectors, for instance, the oil and gas. Of course, there are some, efforts that are ongoing, but there's a lot more that needs to be done in some of those areas. So it goes beyond plugging leakages. Of course, that is easier said than done. But we need to see some pathways as to how we want to undertake some very important reforms to grow investment, to improve the macroeconomic environment, and to also even improve the revenue, and even to reform the budget itself. Because even within this framework of the budget, there are all sorts of things really that should not be there. There are all sorts of lopsided priorities. So all of these things are very critical, very important. It's because with that money, there's very little you can do.
Okay. Well,
so if you are inheriting a situation where the debt together now, by the time you add the CBN debt, all of them, it's going to 70 trillion. So how do you want to deliver on key promises?
Well, Dr.
So the fiscal challenge.
Yes. Go ahead. Yes. Finish on that.
The fiscal challenge is number one. How are you going to fix it without plunging us into additional debt?
But one of the areas
heavily indebted now.
Yes. There are those who have, and gentlemen, you both speak to this. There are those who point to how private businesses run and think maybe if we borrow a template or two from the private sector and attempt to apply to public sector, perhaps it will go somewhere. For instance, there's hardly any blue chip you will get into that you won't see a vision statement, a mission statement, a core value, and all of that. There are those who have questioned whether or not there is a particular path, a direction towards which Nigeria as an institution, if we can use the term, is going on its own. What's a national ethos to which everyone who comes into office, federal, state, or local, must go towards? Do you see that as a significant challenge?
Well, it is a challenge. It's a challenge because you are dealing with, the bureaucracy has a major role to play in the implementation of government policies. You're undertaking reforms, if you want, whatever you want to do, you need the right kind of bureaucracy. And you have a bureaucracy that have been used to a particular way of doing things over the years. Reforming the bureaucracy itself is a major challenge. Because, for those who have been in the private sector, and now find themselves in government, they see that there's a difference. The speed with which you can move as a CEO in a private sector is not the same thing with when you're in government. It's even worse because you have the National Assembly, Parliament, all these people to deal with. And all of them have all sorts of funny interests. You know? So there's a whole lot of challenge that sometimes we just take for granted. That yes, this is the way it is done in the private sector. You get to government, that is the way it happens. It's not exactly like that. Those who have been in private sector and now in government will tell you their experience. So we should not underestimate those institutional issues.
Most certainly.
That
Doctor, we'll come back to you.
Confront.
Yes. Dr. Shibogu, vision, mission, core values as a nation, do you see it as something that those vying for office should consider in order to do things differently for national development?
As a country, we have such.
Oh, really?
They are valuable. You have what guides this country. Your constitution is very explicit on certain issues. There are visions, there are missions to every government. But the issue is, do we keep to those templates?
I don't know the vision.
Fine.
Maybe you can, perhaps there are those who are wondering exactly what is this vision?
Well, you know, the country has one fundamental direction, one, to keep people as a united entity and ensure that there's equity, fairness, and it speaks to making sure that every part of the country is a beneficiary of its national assets.
So how does how does that taper into development is the question.
Well, it's relative in context of how we run that. You see, you said something about taking out some form of private practice into public practice. No. The truth is, private practice is expected to learn from public practice in terms of discipline, in terms of policy. That's where government is supposed to be known for and strong at. Because if you look at any country that grows and is very effective, the secret is from their civil service system. They make good policies, adequate policies that protect their private sector.
Does that happen in
now, in this place, we have systems that are in competition with private sector. Right, because we work in silos, we work in clusters, and everyone is interested for their own selfish reasons. So it's not a collective interest in most cases when you come. That's why I said when you come to practice, it is the rules are there. We have a very robust civil service policy. It's been reformed over the years.
When it comes to being reformed now.
Yes, but there's no perfect policy anywhere in the world. But people look at the loopholes and take advantage of it. So we are more interested in the system deficits than in things that will make things work well. And why are we saying so? You see, private sector is supposed to drive a system in terms of economy, in terms of development, and the public sector is supposed to enable it with its policy. But the public sector is also supposed to play a role in certain areas where we call social enterprise, like the protection of your power sector. It's a security issue. The protection of your reserves is a security issue. So these are the things that would keep a country going.
But in the event where you don't have enough money to even do the basics, you heard Dr. Yusuf talking about the fact that we don't even have enough money to service our debts, much less do the significant things that need to be done.
It calls for the discipline that we're talking about now. You know, what priorities are we borrowing for? Are you borrowing to pay salaries, or you are borrowing to carry on capital projects that in the long term will generate the kind of resources that will sustain a country?
But you know that's what we have heard from the former Minister of Transport concerning the facilities we took for building the railways and all of those things. And
I have no problem with the intention of what you take a loan for. I have a problem in the sustenance of such things. Today, you have taken loans to build Abuja-Kaduna rail project. It's not running at the moment. Who is paying? We are going to pay, whether you like it or not. We are going to pay. You are taking monies to build projects that you have not put adequate provisions for its security to protect it, short, medium, and long term. That's the question. You know, you can't say you've taken funds from development partners to build roads that you know that in the next 2 years, you are back to that road again. Someone is paying, and that's what is happening now, because you will move away from capital expenditure to recurrent expenditure, and you will spend a lot more on recurrent expenditure because you just have people who will not do anything and will be definite to get their pay at the end of the month. But if you are putting some form of resources in places where it will be private sector driven, not private sector run, I mean private sector driven. For example, you are bringing in all players, you put a rail project and you're putting other players to run in it. Everyone's interest will be encapsulated in it. But the issue is that where there's one person who determines everything, you want to run a monopoly of a place where you say you are liberal, then you have problems.
Okay. Well, Dr. Yusuf, looking at the what you call rhetorics that have been, released by the political parties, especially for the national elections so far. One of them has withdrawn its manifestos and says they need to do some work on it before they release it again. And that's another one that is saying we're going to release it in the course of this month of November. Seeing what you have seen so far from those that you have seen and those that are being reviewed and all, how persuaded are you, how convinced are you that there is some light at the end of the tunnel, no matter how long this tunnel is?
Well, I can see some light at the end of the tunnel because looking at all the frontline candidates, I can see some varying degrees of private sector bias in terms of their knowledge, in terms of their exposure. I can also see the fact that, well, apart from the manifesto, because, anybody can get a good consultant to put together a manifesto. Apart from the manifesto, the capacity to put a team together, not based on ethnicity, not based on party affiliation, not based on tribe, a team that are competent, that have proper understanding, and that have the freedom to be able to deal with issues of economic policy implementation, and all of that. I can see that at least in some of the frontline candidates. They have that capacity to put a team together. Because one of the challenges we have today is not lack of good policy documents. If you pick the ERGP, if you pick the development plan, we have excellent documents. But those documents are just gathering dust. Nobody is, playing or acting on those documents. People just wake up, walk to the president, get approval for some policy, and it becomes policy. Or you have people around who don't even have proper understanding of the economy, dictating the pace of how the economy should be run. So, but we are likely to see a shift, from that. That is what I'm thinking. But again, I think that the candidates or the political parties also need to manage expectations, because some very difficult decisions will have to be taken. And the situation as it is already extremely very bad in terms of the social condition of the citizens. So how they will deal with that is left for us to see. And we have to also see a lot more in the area of policy, macroeconomic policies, foreign exchange policy, because we have to move completely away from the current foreign exchange policy, because it has been almost a disaster in terms of the impact on investment environment, the impact on investors' confidence,
Dr. Yusuf, allow me
inflow of foreign investment.
Just 1 second. I mean, you said something earlier. My apologies. You said something earlier about the fact that we don't have a dearth of excellent policies and documents and all of that. It's always in the execution. One of the things that I think we have had, I mean, you are also aware, and we've perhaps spoken to it a number of times, that some of the issues we're contending today didn't just start. Some of them have been on 10 years, 20 years, 30 years. The ASU strike issue, for instance, has been on for the upwards of 40 years. So one is wondering how these policies cascade down to the ministries, departments, and agencies, to the ports, to the borders, to the immigration, to customs, and all those things. Perhaps that's one of the challenges that we've had over time. How do you see that playing out? Because it is one thing for the policy to go out. It's another thing altogether for that policy to be actioned.
No, that's an institutional issue. Because no matter how good your policies are, if your institutions don't have capacity, you can't achieve anything. If you have a good policy and you just go and bring your relation or somebody because he contributed to the victory of the party, and you put the person there, you're not likely to get any results.
Okay.
So we need a system, we need institutions that will be merit-driven, institutions that have capacity. So it's an institutional problem.
All right.
If we see any aspect of government that is failing, it's essentially about the capacity of the institutions. And the institutions is made up of people. Depends on who is leading the institutions. What kind of staff do they have? And how well motivated are they? All of these things have to go together. Okay. So it's an institutional problem.
Okay.
When you have this decoupling or disconnection between the policies and what is happening in reality.
Okay. Well, I believe my colleagues in Abuja will want to join the conversation, but before then, let me ask you the same question. You seems to be agreeing with Dr. Yusuf.
Yes, I do. I do. In totality, I do.
But then what do we need to do because unless the capacity of the institutions that will execute the policies are up to par, it's just going to be, as you said earlier, another document on the shelf.
But I think you should enhance the capacities of those institutions. It's not as if we don't have the competence. It's just we've been placing people at the wrong places. So some persons find some agencies or ministry or departments favorable to them. You post them there. They sit down like lame dogs. Prevent those who have the capacity to do their jobs. You know, and that was what called for some autonomy in certain government departments and agencies. You know, you can't do that in FIRS, for example. You can't do that in NCC, for example. But there are other institutions that require that level of autonomy and power given to them to drive the process. So we have a lot of agencies, departments and agencies today that are sitting as lame ducks because the institutional strength is clearly lacking. Competence speaks to policy.
So how do these issues that you gentlemen have raised, what can the political aspirants, the presidential aspirants do about it?
Get a proper head of service. The office of the head of service has an establishment department that knows everyone's competence in the Nigerian civil service to date. They know everyone by their qualifications, by training, and they know who to place at the right department. So if you become the president today, all you need to do is get your head of service to sit with you. And you will place the right persons and you get the results that you want.
Okay. Well, Dr. Yusuf, another issue around who becomes president or not is that of collaboration with states. So over the years, it will seem like we always I hear body language, and I'm wondering exactly what that means, because the laws are clear, the policy direction is clear, what the policies are supposed to achieve are clear, the KPIs are there, the JDs for whoever is supposed to do what is clear. So collaboration with states sometimes, I don't know what you think of that between the federal and the state governments. What do you think is lacking that needs to be worked on? Because development actually happens at the states. because that's where the lives of people are directly impacted.
Yes, the good thing is that some or many of the major candidates or major parties have been talking about evolution of powers. Some call it restructuring, some they call it all sorts of names. But the whole idea is to strengthen the capacity of the states to be able to do a lot more, to be able to be a lot more creative, a lot more resourceful, by virtue of the opportunities that are open to them to generate and also optimize the use of resources in their domains. I think that for me is a very good pointer. Because part of the reasons that have weakened the state is the over-centralization of power and resources at the center. So if we see any of them that eventually wins, truly and sincerely commit to this evolution of powers, the process has already started. You have this constitutional review process ongoing now, where a lot of these things are being moved from exclusive list to concurrent list. If we're able to achieve that, we are likely to see a lot more creativity, innovation, and even competition among the states, which will help to optimize resources. And some of the candidates have been talking as if they are the one that will do everything. They talk about education, they talk about agri. They are not talking so much about this issue of the role of the subnationals.
Well, I guess it's...
federal government cannot do everything.
Exactly. So I guess it's ongoing conversation, because this is just one of several, as I've said a few other times, because one wonders exactly how much really can just one person do. We have to anchor at this point, because there is some issue that's been going on all morning, and we need to talk a little about that before we go. Dr. Muda Yusuf, Director General, CPPE, thank you so much for your time this morning. As well as Dr. Monday Michaels Ashibago, CEO Bill's Box, and former spokesman NASMI. Thank you again for your time.